Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Movie Trap. I am Zach Powers. With me, as always, in our normal alphabetical clockwise fashion of introduction.
I'm Russell Carlson.
And I'm Chris Boroff.
Technically incorrect, but still, we will continue
In some
on.
semblance, yeah, right. I think we just got the direction wrong. Much like this fucking movie.
We are doing some Halloween spook 'em ups this time.
It's a scary movie trap.
Everybody, carve a jack-o'-lantern and sit out in the leaves and
Eat some candy corn and,
Yep.
make sure to only give, the kids like the crappy Three Musketeers or something, so you could hoard it all later.
be somewhat more nervous about us than the election because it's sooner for you than it is for us.
Yes, indeed. We're back in time.
Yeah, by the time this comes out, I will not be sleeping. I'll just be like, come on, how's it coming?
Oh, boy.
Yeah.
Go check 538 or whatever your poll of preference is.
Frantically refresh Twitter to check on whatever fucking craziness is happening in this fucking country. So yes, this is round 2. This round goes to one Zachary Powers, as I went first with Phantasm. And the theme this week, after a very process that we did, was scary movies from the year 1961 to 1979.
1960 to 1979.
All right, I
Psycho
keep cutting.
is eligible. Thank you very much.
All right, fair enough.
If Chris chooses to employ it.
Still meat on the bone.
Yeah. Well, everybody's trying to get me to drop what it is before the end of show, and I've just been like no snitches on this thing the whole time.
I have
like,
so
I ain't
many
telling
suspicions.
anybody.
I have so many suspicions.
Russell and I have graciously left him with probably, if you were to make the 10 most influential horror movies of this time period, I don't think Russell or mine would probably crack that list. I think
I will hear arguments for this one, not Phantasm. I will hear arguments. I won't agree, but I'll hear them.
regardless, my pick was 1973's Don't Look Now, or I believe in Italian it was called In Venice, a shocking red December.
You know a title's great when it's got an ellipsis, right? Like, that's what a title really is. You can really do well.
December rosso shocking.
Yeah, you have to wonder why they couldn't just say "Don't Look Now" or whatever the title was originally in Italian.
The
Okay.
du Maurier story.
I don't want to. I don't get it. What is the title? Don't look at what? Nobody's really looking at anything.
Well, clearly,
they're listening
this is a
and
spoiler
thinking.
podcast. Don't look at the murder dwarf.
That's right. Yes, I know. Right. Well, I didn't, because anyway. Well, I'll get into that later.
Regardless, this is based off a short story by Daphne du Maurier. We'll talk about that later, but she's famous for stories like Rebecca, My Cousin Rachel, The Birds, and this. It is my choice, so it is contingent upon me to give a brief description of what occurs in this film.
If you can.
Yeah, well, it's not super plot heavy. As I said, it's based on not a full book, but like a short story. So plot-wise, it's pretty scant. Basically, Donald Sutherland and Julie Christie play a married couple. And Donald Sutherland works restoring old churches. And early in the film, at their England home, their daughter, who is wearing a shiny red Mac, accidentally drowns. Donald Sutherland seems to almost immediately know what happened before he could possibly know, and runs out to recover her body from the creek all too late. They also have a son who is only there to draw away the mother. He has no function in the plot beyond drawing away the mother. But they go to Venice some amount of time later. It's not entirely clear how long it's been. They're not immediately, like, in the aftermath of mourning their daughter, but it's been somewhat recent, we can infer. Less than a year?
Yeah,
I would say less than a year.
It's been
I
fairly
think that's
recent.
fair.
It feels like we're leaving something out when we're describing it this way, though. Like the editing for this is extremely strange as it's going through.
Well, I can't. If I'm going to talk about the plot, I can't. It's
Okay.
I'm going to tell you. I'm going to tell you the fucking
We are going to tunnel through this, Borif.
All right,
Okay.
we could talk about the editing later.
Gotcha.
That's a different thing.
Gotcha.
That we could all. I'm telling you what happens in the fucking movie.
Right, yeah.
Okay.
So they're in Venice. The wife meets a pair of sisters, one of whom is blind, and claims to have the second sight, and says that her daughter is with them and happy, and it seems to do a great deal to relieve her grief. Donald Sutherland thinks she is a crazy person for believing these two sisters and consistently seeing them. Eventually, the sisters claim that Donald Sutherland is in danger during his time in Venice. Meanwhile, there are Donald Sutherland, who may be psychic, is seeing occasionally visions of a child in a red Mac.
The suggestion is there that he's psychic but doesn't know it. That he might have second sight, but he's so rational-minded that it's beyond.
Yeah, the shinning. Yeah, even at the beginning when the little girl dies, like there's an implication that he has kind of a premonition about it.
So he's seeing visions of a child in a little red Mac, and eventually what occurs is the wife leaves because their son is injured. He is left alone in Venice. He has a near fatal accident and comes to believe that maybe there is something to this prophecy about him being in danger and his daughter perhaps being around or seeking resolution from her parents. He follows the child in the little red Mac one night, sort of at the far ends of his paranoia after thinking he sees his wife on a boat and things.
Yeah, there's a subplot where he thinks he sees his wife and spends an entire day panicking that she's gone. And then when he finds out she's not gone, she returns and he's somewhat in a moment of relief, but he's just out wandering around and sees this little red smock child.
And it's worth noting that in the background there have been a series of murders going on in Venice at this time.
Yes, I was about to say, we're really leap over that because it seems kind of important at the end. I don't know, but...
Yeah, it was twist. If you know two things about this movie, this is probably one of the two things. He follows the child in the red Mac to an abandoned chapel or something, and when it turns around, it is a scary-looking dwarf that murders him on the spot. And it turns out it was the murderer that has been terrorizing Venice.
Yeah,
and not his deceased child.
Yeah, and when he thought he saw his wife earlier in Venice and went on that whole thing chasing her around,
it was the
actually
funeral.
It was a premonition of his own
funeral. He was the ghost the whole time.
Of his own funeral in the Venice canals.
Yeah.
And that is, in a nutshell, the story of Don't Look Now. But there is more to talk about than simply the bare bones plot.
Indeed. No, I mean, I'll right off the bat. I didn't particularly enjoy this movie, but I guess I appreciated it for what it was. Like, my appreciation for it didn't deter from me wanting to, stab my eyeballs out, because there's a lot of cool stuff going on in this movie. But, the idea that this is a horror movie is kind of a stretch, though.
Yeah, it's a bit more of a thriller.
Yeah, I mean, it uses the... I wrote this down. It uses the terror comes from atmosphere rather than the action. That's where the real dread and doom comes from. And this movie does it pretty good with the editing and some of the music and certainly a lot of the scenery that they use. But it's a bit of a stretch to call it a horror movie. There is no real manifestation of this dread, really.
The death scene at the end is pretty intense.
Right, the murder dwarf. I forgot.
Yeah,
right.
There's the murder dwarf, and then there's also all the dead bodies they keep pulling out of the wharf.
The canals,
out of the canals. But a lot of it was definitely more texture and sort of sense of the space in the film, because it feels very claustrophobic at the same time they're on the water. But the editing also, it's strange because it starts using editing. They're communicating to the audience the concept of being psychic in a way that isn't. It's just not the standard way you do it.
It's not all that straightforward. You kind of have to interpret that, and then you kind of. I mean, the way Donald Sutherland just sort of storms out of there is a good way to convey it, but the editing, and plus it sets a tone right away for the film. The whole film is like that. So it really does get your seatbelt on, because there's going to be some sharp cuts. And, don't look away now, but, you might miss some frame or two intercut that is demonstrating Sutherland's power, but also you as the audience, your sense of dread and fear.
Yeah, it's kind of tonally the opposite of the editing for the movie Slaughterhouse-5, where whenever they jump giant time periods, it's always done in a seamless camera shot to mess with the audience. So it's just funny because... Go ahead.
Yeah. I do think that a lot of this movie, more than horror, there's like moments of perhaps dread or tone, but it's also something of a... Last time we discussed Phantasm, and in its way, Phantasm is a deeply 1970s movie.
Very true.
And this, in addition to continuing the theme of murder dwarves, is also a deeply 1970s movie in a way that I would say is quite different. So Phantasm seems slapdash and random and jarring in terms of its plot, and unfocused perhaps in terms of its script, but never boring. This is an extremely slow movie for the most part. It's dreamlike, it's experimental in its editing. Plot-wise, it's sparse in a way that Phantasm is full. But I just think that there are two different aspects of the 1970s.
Yeah. Both have a sort of similar, like, I don't know, it's weird to use this sort of phrase for a film, but the kind of the smell of the 70s, you know what I mean? Like it just oozes through the celluloid. Right. And it's great. The 70s part and a lot of this film I did particularly, like I said, I appreciated. I just didn't really have a good time watching it. But your point about Phantasm and how it's sort of the opposite of it. And it's funny because both Phantasm and Don't Look Now, I would say grief is the thrust of it, or at least not so much Phantasm, but like the big twist at the end of Phantasm sort of has that
accidentally.
Yes, indeed. Oh yeah, and we've covered that for sure. Here it's very intentional. That's the whole point of the movie.
I mean, this is adapted from a story written by an author who was a real author who wrote good stories.
Yeah, no, and even, when you scroll through the IMDb page, they talk about the scene in the church where right after Julie Christie meets the psychic sisters, who I think it's important that they're not from Venice. No. They're from the United Kingdom. They're immigrants as well, I guess.
Tourists,
I mean, it seems like they kind of live there, but it doesn't make sense. But I think
they jump hotels at a certain point.
Yeah, I don't know, but I think
going home
because the heat is on.
Yeah, well, as they were introducing them, it started sounding more and more like they were sort of hucksters. That they, it leaves it open to the audience interpretation for a long portion of the film as to whether those two are really what they say they are.
Yeah, and I wanted to bring that up because, like, a part of the power of this film is using Venice itself as this sort of strange place, the architecture, and using it in the dead of winter when it's not tourist season, is a pretty bleak, lonely place, I imagine. And even having the people there be so... not like Donald Sutherland, they don't even put subtitles for the Italian. It adds to the sense of confusion and sort of frenzy that is this movie.
It's an interesting, I think the one thing I'll say about the use of Venice before I forget is that I don't know if exactly this type of Venice exists nowadays. Granted, in 30 years, Venice probably won't exist, but it's a type of Venice I've never seen portrayed in movies as far as I can remember, which is a lot of time when it's labyrinthine, and when they're going through these different places, there's so many old, like, unrepaired, forgotten nooks and crannies to this city. It's interesting. Venice is always portrayed so romantically and so beautifully, and here, like, at night, it's like being trapped in a maze that's like a dying, decrepit, forgotten, walled off.
Yeah, you feel like you're out of time. You know, like
have either of you guys read the actual story it's based off of, or no?
I have not.
I'd be curious to, because I couldn't find a copy to read for this. I was just wondering how much of it was in the original versus this, because I remembered reading a little bit on this, and this was a co-production between, I think, England and Italy. So it was interesting to kind of see how that came together during that time period. I don't know,
especially the 70s.
Yeah. What did you guys think of the sex scene? Just out of curiosity.
So the sex scene is, like, again, one of the things about it is it's edited in the way that is indicative of a lot of this movie. So we briefly talked about the editing. This is somewhat relevant here. They'll have flashes to things that will happen later, happen before, or happen roughly in the same time period as the sex scene, you know, them going about their day, or a flash that reminds them of their loss or something while they're having sex, and then cut back to the sex. It was very, I know that it was very shocking at the time.
Yeah,
I don't
it was
think
pretty
it's
controversial.
Especially shocking now.
Yeah.
Except that I don't think a major film would feature a sex scene that was sort of this naturalistic and featuring people that look this normal, perhaps.
Yeah,
I think.
Sure.
I mean, I've seen sex scenes like that in other movies. Like, I think A History of Violence had a specifically kind of an odd sex scene in it. But it's always odd how these are, like, shown, because people always talk it up, and there's like a whole, you know, theory that it was unsimulated and yada 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 and all this other kind of nonsense. But it's just always stuck out to me as odd that this is somehow a super sexy scene, and I wondered if it was just because of, like,
I think it was just because of the time. I mean, like, pornography was
that or the
not
contrast,
really a thing
like,
yet. I
he
mean,
was he's like brushing his teeth, and then it goes into that scene. Like, it's just odd because that scene is triggered by him brushing his teeth. Like, everybody brushes.
There is a
their
weird
teeth.
thing with toothpaste in this. Yeah,
it's weird.
Yeah, I noticed.
Yeah.
I thought, like, I felt it pretty distracting, to be honest with you, not because of how shocked I was of my, you know, Puritan values or what have you. It was more of just how awkward it seemed for everybody involved. Like, it did seem like Julie Christie and Donald Sutherland were doing their loving best, but it did seem kind of, because of the way it's shot and the way it's performed, it just felt awkward. And it's not out of place, because I understand why that scene is in the movie. It's sort of to show that, like, this is not particularly a couple that necessarily hates each other. I would say, you know, Zach, you brought up the fact that, like, the psychic sisters sort of relieve Julie Christie's grief. I would argue that it almost awakens it, because the sex scene happens almost right after the sisters meeting, or does it happen before?
It happens
remember.
after.
Yeah.
Okay.
So they meet the sisters during the brunch that day. And then that evening, I think probably intentionally so, obviously the Julie Christie character is, I think the vibe is supposed to be reinvigorated for the first time since the death of their daughter.
Okay. I mean, like, I was just, I just wanted to pause at that, because I wasn't, I was hearing it that it relieved her grief was sort of a different vibe that I was getting throughout the film, because it almost seems like she's finally addressing it. She's finally looking it sort of square in the eye. But I mean, you could imagine that a couple going through that of losing a child like that would have a pretty fraught relationship, especially in the sex life. So I got this sense that the sex scene was more of a catharsis for her and for him, though it was not performed or shot that way. So that's how I felt. I mean, I didn't really care. I
think character-wise, it made sense for like a long-term relationship to kind of see that it got back to that point. Yeah, it was a little intense with how like frank the scene was. Yeah. But have you guys seen the other Nicolas Roeg movies, like A Man Who Fell to Earth?
I have not. Apparently, I've seen A Man Who Fell to Earth. I forgot that he did that. But I was very young and in high school and probably blasted on drugs.
Okay, fine. So, well, we could rewatch that one at some point. Just this sex scene.
We'll do a Bowie. We'll do a Bowie theme. That'll be easy.
There's a sex scene in A Man Who Fell to Earth, which is interestingly paired with this because it's also an awkward sex scene that involves Rip Torn and a lot of Rip Torn nudity as a young 70s man.
In his day, he was kind of he was a pretty handsome man.
Hey
in his
man,
day.
that's fine.
But I'll know him forever as, of course, Artie from Larry Sanders Show. He was fucking god for that role.
I should say, Shannon read the summary for what the story this is based on is about. And by her description, this is a fairly faithful adaptation. It's also worth noting that Du Maurier herself was a fan of this adaptation. And it's also worth noting that while she has not read this, Shannon has read some of her other work like Rebecca and My Cousin Rachel. Obviously, Rebecca, adapted by Alfred Hitchcock in 1940.
You just got my point, buddy. My point was going to go to the person who mentioned Hitchcock before I did.
Oh, well, there you go. And Hitchcock also adapted The Birds, which she also wrote. Per Shannon, I have not read one of Du Maurier's works. This is closer in tone to what her stories feel like than the work of, say, an Alfred Hitchcock.
I can appreciate that.
One thing I should say really quick on that note, evidently The Birds and Rebecca were both at one point held in contention for having been plagiarized. At one point, a significant time after... I can't remember exactly how it worked out, but there was a writer in Spain who claimed that Rebecca was her work and just would not give them the rights to it until her dying day. And the other one was a writer who wrote a short story about the birds. So it was just one of those things. Anyway, they were both found to be specious, and she was cleared of those things. But the odd thing is with the Spanish one that they had the exact same plot and story. Anyway, go for it.
Well, my point is concluded. Yeah, this is, I think the more conventional film storytelling of Hitchcock is actually probably less like the dreamy, trance-like, macabre, sort of ominous feeling that her work generally elicited than this movie was, is my understanding, based on secondhand accounts. And she herself was a fan of this film, so...
Well, this film does permeate with strong Hitchcock vibes. There's a lot of paranoia. There's a lot of, like Vertigo was the first film I thought of, like where it was just like, you're kind of following one dude. It's Donald Sutherland sort of most of the time. I mean, you're kind of following Julie Christie a little bit, but she's more of a catalyst to what eventually happens to Donald Sutherland. And yeah, I just think that, yeah, it's got a lot of Hitchcock vibes, and I very much understand it. But Hitchcock, by the time he was doing those movies, I mean, these are almost, The Birds was done in, whenever. So like it is a different time period to where somebody like this guy can get kind of rogue with it. Like the 70s were a lot more of a...
You got my point for making a pun.
Was that an intentional pun?
That was. I mean,
you got my point
totally.
For the pun.
Yeah. Hey, you know me, dude. I'm a big fan of fucking puns. I'm a huge fan. But yeah, no, and that's why I think that this movie gets a lot of. I understand the legacy of this film, like I do. Like it's considered one of the best British films ever made, apparently.
Well,
though it takes place in Venice.
It's definitely one of the most often referenced in film school movies because it's used as like an example of experimental editing and elliptical editing and, you know.
Yeah, I mean, but so is Carnival of Souls, and that fucking movie sucks. So I mean, it's again, it's not that I didn't. I appreciated what this movie did for what it was, but like I said, it's not particularly fun watching. It's not particularly like a joyful film, even for a horror movie. Like, say what you will about Phantasm, we've said plenty, but at least it was more or less like it's a more of a traditional ride than this movie is. But that being said, I appreciate the idea of using human emotion as the actual terror, as the monster.
Let me give one of my points to Russell on this one, because I think he hit on something that is true for me as well, which is watching this movie, there's a lot in the scene-to-scene way it's constructed and edited that I intellectually appreciate, that I understand, that I feel is effective in creating an atmosphere, in creating tension, in creating dread. And also, as someone who doesn't like it when people say old movies are boring, man, this thing's a little boring. Just a little bit. There's a lot of walking around Venice.
Yep.
I get it. You're building an atmosphere. It's too much, movie. All right. The sex scene was like crazy for being whatever confrontation, like too like insane at the time. Now it's just like this sex scene isn't shocking me. It's just a little too long.
But you know, you can't really look away because you've already set the pace with this film. If I look away, I'm going to miss an important cutaway that like is going to signify some foretelling of the later on.
The lens flare for a second. And
right. Yeah.
It's just funny because when you compare something like this to like Mandy, a lot of people say Mandy is a very slow movie, but there's a lot happening in Mandy. In this one, it's like there's just a lot of talking and dread, but it's also that thing with the editing that you were describing. It's more like an intellectual process. You don't feel it. So it's, you know, sort of like when you watch a whodunit, you already know that someone's going to know who kills somebody at the end, then they're going to find them. So everything before that point is just ticking off boxes as you go through it.
Yeah, I feel it's very dreamlike, and I'm certain that many
that was
dreams,
the intention.
If you could watch them objectively, would plot-wise not move greatly quickly, but are enthralling in their oddness. And perhaps this evokes this, but also, you know, it's at times if you're, I mean,
it's a chore. It's a chore.
If you're not if you're not up for it, it's gonna be a bit of a rough one.
Yeah, even when I watched this in the morning, like very early in the morning, and then Sarah woke up and she's like, "Is this supposed to be a horror movie?" And I'm like, I guess, you know, I understand why it's considered like in the genre, because for one, the murder dwarf, I'll get to that in a second.
Well, we'll have to eventually.
Yeah, right, because it is only the whole point of the fucking movie.
Listen, people seem to this episode and they're like, there are two things they got to talk about: the sex scene and the murder dwarf.
That's right. Yeah, right. Anyway, I appreciate movies that don't fit in a box, and that's why it is more of the thriller category than a horror category. But because it deals with this kind of quasi supernatural ESP thing, which I didn't write this down, but I mean, like, correct me if I'm wrong, was like ESP like a big thing in the 70s? Like this, that's what I thought.
Yeah,
that's what I thought.
All that stuff was pretty popular in the 70s. I looked up some of the interviews about this, and they were asking Donald Sutherland at one point, like, what his thoughts were, and he thought that the film was too critical on the concept of ESP, that he wishes something positive would come out of people's lives, or would come into people's lives. And I don't know. That stuff's very strange. Like, if you ever get to see a lot of films in the 70s did that. Also, the remake of Invasion of the Body Snatchers was another one where it's just like all this transcendentalism.
Another Donald Sutherland.
Yeah,
Joint.
indeed.
Yep.
Also, my wife said that Donald Sutherland, when he's traipsing around with his haircut and the scarf, totally looks like
Doctor Who.
Tom Baker. Exactly. Bingo.
Yeah.
I mean, that's exactly what she's like. Is she because she was still kind of half asleep. So is he watching a Doctor Who episode, which would not be out of character? But then she's like, oh, this is not a Doctor Who episode.
Yeah.
He's got a bright blue coat and like a 70s ass scarf and belt.
Yeah, my Sarah said the same thing. She was like,
okay.
Yep.
Good for the Sarahs.
Tom Baker.
Tom Baker. He's the man. Still the man.
Shannon also agreed. So there
okay. Hey, all right. Hey, look, guys, I'm not going to say a lot, but we know how to pick them.
Speaking of actors, real quick, how did you guys feel about the inspector, the Italian inspector? Did he seem a little strange to you?
It was my favorite part. I loved it, though. I fucking loved it. I really, because that would let me, this is why, I mean, like, again, I know a movie doesn't want me to lean into a punch, but I was sort of thinking, like, is there more going on to this? Because Venice does seem very strange, and everybody's acting is there some sort of, like, state communist conspiracy now? And that's what they're not supposed to look at? I really, my brain went there, and the way this guy performs, it almost seems like it, because he's so fucking, like, intense about it, and like, yes, Mr. Bond, you know, like
he does seem like he's keeping something secret from everybody or trying to play them to pull out information.
The thing is, do you guys know the story with that actor?
Nope.
He doesn't speak,
I read it on the...
He doesn't speak English.
Oh, well, that's pretty common.
He doesn't have any idea what he was saying. So he just learned all his lines phonetically. Yeah.
You gotta love Italian cinema. They just work and work and work. They don't care.
Fair,
they're like, fuck yeah, we'll do it.
There's a few Italian characters in this. There's that guy. There's this guy that owns, I guess, this hotel.
The hotel manager. I
Yeah.
totally looked that guy up because I'm like, I've seen this fucking guy before. I don't know, in like a Fellini film or Vittorio De Sica or something like that. But this guy's been around, and he has been around. I looked it up. He's amazing.
Yeah. But the hotel he's very interested in getting fucking Donald Sutherland and Julie Christie out of his hotel because they are closing up for winter, and he needs these fucking foreigners to get out of his hotel before they close up for the season. These tourists got to get out of here.
Right. He's on vacation, and his vacation entails like sitting in his kitchen in a bathrobe. You know, that's his vacation.
He was sitting in his kitchen in a bathrobe with a young lady. He was talking to a lady.
Okay.
He was entertaining someone.
Tiny room behind the desk.
Yeah, he lives in a cellar. Yeah, right. Yeah.
But it was so small, and there's just a set of stairs going up to this tiny little living space up behind the desk.
Yeah,
It must be great.
I think they put him in there as comic relief just because the movie was like there was nothing else keeping the tempo. So if it wasn't in there, there wouldn't have been anything to pop you back up. However, after those scenes go, it's right back into that slower tempo.
Yeah, but like
I found the phone scenes very funny, but I'll get to that in a second.
Yeah, there's the Italian priest, and then the people of Italy at large. Like, there's one of the scenes where Donald Sutherland is lost in the alleys of Venice at night. Like, I believe there's like, you sometimes see the inspector kind of following him. And there's also a very strange shot where a man's face is just leering through a screen door as he walks by that has no relevance on the plot, but it's a very, like, it contributes to I think Italy is supposed to be alienating and odd, and probably part of the reason why they chose to make the two sisters not Italian but tourists is because perhaps they were meant to be some kind of tether into normalcy, although that only becomes apparent at the end when it's clear they're trustworthy. For most of the movie, it's like, you don't know what those two's game is.
Yeah,
Bunch of mumbo jumbo.
Yeah, they feel like Sylvia Brown's, like before Sylvia Brown was out there, where it's just like she's plainly like just throwing these people a pile of crock, but you know, it's just convincing old people that are scared and confused to take their money, and we kind of think they're doing
and their
that
heyday
too,
was
Julie.
the 70s. You know, this was their heyday. You know, a bunch of charlatans and that kind of like. But I thought that the movie was going to be mostly this sort of weird psychic thing, with the sisters and Donald Sutherland's premonitions and what have you. But then with this subplot that I really didn't give too much thoughts, because the movie does not spend any time at all discussing
they really
it.
put it background, yeah.
Yeah, and then it happens at the end, and you discover, so the murder dwarf's the serial killer the whole time. I got that, right? I'm not an idiot?
Yes.
Okay, good. Okay.
There's sometimes alluded to series of murders. There's one extended sequence where they're pulling a woman's body out of the canals. One of the divers really goes for that woman's butt, too, when they're pushing her into the boat.
Yeah. That's why I one of the things that made me sort of like, okay, well, whatever movie was the end scene with the murder dwarf. Just because I really did feel like it was a long walk for a little bit. And I don't mean that just because it was small. I think that we took a long time
it felt like a Shaggy Dog story. It was like an O.
totally
Henry ending.
right. Yeah, right. Like, if I didn't made those blasted kids, I don't know. So that part sort of got to me. So, but again, I appreciate when movies make me lean into a punch and then I get knocked in the jaw. There's something to be said for that. But considering how much of the movie is about the sisters and whether or not you can trust them or not, I mean, once I understood what the Donald Sutherland seeing the sisters and Julie Christie crossing on the boat and he's calling for Laura or whatever, I understood what that was. I mean, this literally, I thought, Sixth Sense, he's dead already, or he's going to die. Like, this is easy. But it doesn't make, and I thought, like, the sisters are going to kill her or something, or he's going to fall. Like, I constantly thought he would just, like, fall and break his neck or whatever, which he almost does. I mean, like, they kind of get into that in, like, a Final Destination sort of way.
Yeah, in that scene, the first time I saw it, I was just more confused than anything else. Because as an audience member, I was like, oh, why are they there? And then, like, what is that about? Or why did that happen? So then at the end, when it pays off that it was a premonition, it's sort of like, oh, okay, well, that explains what that confusion was. And I think the whole, like, gag was supposed to be that you would feel the confusion that he feels at having The Shining or whatever it was that he had. Yeah.
Yeah, and I get it. And again, but it was just like when the murder dwarf comes around, pulls out the straight razor, cuts his throat, I was sort of like, all right, movie, if you say so. I mean,
it's very gross. It is gross. It's a little.
That's a lot of carbonation in that man's blood. My lord.
Yeah,
and I think it's one of those things. So, I have seen screen caps of the smiling face of the murdered dwarf before, randomly on the internet. I think it is a bit like that thing at the end of Sleepaway Camp. There's a still that is maybe the most famous thing in that movie, and it's the big reveal still. And I think Don't Look Now, if it has one commonality with Sleepaway Camp, it's that its most famous frame is the big reveal still, and it's like sort of a creepy image by itself in isolation that is somewhat popular online.
Yeah, and that's what
it's like Rosebud. It's the same thing. It's the one spoiler that every film like this, if you just have like one shot like that's a spoiler that you can't really come back to and see it fresh. So like even though you hadn't seen this movie, by the time it got to the end, where you're like, oh, I think this is where that still's from.
Right, and again, if you've gone to film school, they teach this in editing class. Yeah. I mean, and as they should. I mean, like I appreciate that craft for what it was. I mean, I really do. And you know, but this is also not to bring it back to, but why the fuck not to bring it back to Phantasm. Editing is what makes this movie. You know, like same with Phantasm. Phantasm, the editing made that movie. So it's the same with this one, just in a different way. And I think Zach's right, far more intentional. That this was sort of the overall vision that he had to begin with. That I think I think this even happened while he was making it, because I was going through the IMDb hole and I found that like the scene of the church was largely improvised. He had pages and pages of just overwrought dialogue, and then when he saw them do that, he was almost like, you know what?
She lights the candle.
Yeah, and Donald Sutherland says, "I don't like this church," and she's like, "It's beautiful. What are you talking about?" And he felt that was enough to sort of convey the schism between the two as far as where they're at emotionally. And probably taste in architecture, I guess.
Yeah.
But it was enough to sort of show, and I appreciated that because there's too many times when you watch, especially in the fucking 70s, where a director is directing his own script to sort of be married to that. And I appreciate the fact that just to see the sort of performance and let that carry the day. That's well done.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely one of those things that, you can tell they probably were filming for a while and then kind of picked stuff out. Sometimes you get lucky like this, and then sometimes you got other
Phantasm.
filmmakers. Yeah, Phantasm. or other things where it's just like super long and weird. I don't know, like the Thin Red Line was another one that I think was edited in the same way.
Jesus fucking Christ.
It was so long and it was rough.
Oh, God.
And,
gouge my eyeballs
But this was far more entertaining than that.
Yeah.
I dragged my parents to that in the theater. They both fell asleep. And I'm just sitting there like, I wish I was them. Anyway, yeah, it didn't really bore me, but it is like a chore. You really have to kind of slog through a lot of, and you have to, it relies on you to do a lot of the legwork for itself, and that comes through in the editing, and that's well done.
There are extremely effective individual moments. Like we said, the editing is unique and influential. The way they film the distant shots of the murder dwarf and her little red Mac is pretty compelling. It's like very eye-catching and mysterious, and I think it works fairly well. It is, from what I've read, a very referenced sort of visual. Steven Spielberg would talk about Schindler's List, referencing this film as one of the influences, assumedly with the use of the red in the, the
little girl's coat. Well, it's also like Event Horizon. They do a whole thing with a girl in a red coat. It's a very common thing now.
Yeah. And this one, like I said, it's a different sort of payoff. Maybe it's just because I've been so ingrained with that, and I thought this payoff was going to be something completely different. You have no context of this red dwarf even existing. You have a context of some serial killer out there, but you have nothing to suggest that this is an actual thing. Unlike Phantasm, that nemesis doesn't have a name, but you know who the fuck he is. But with this person, you're like, oh, but. Again, that's the point of the movie. The movie is to make you sort of chase after this, and then I stab you. That's clearly the point of the movie.
Okay, one thing real quick. I'm going to give Zach a point because he laughed when you said Red Dwarf. Okay. And do we have more thoughts on this, guys? Are we ready for final conclusions on this puppy?
Yeah, I don't know.
I got one more thought, and I just wanted to ask this because I read this. I tried to. This was one of those movies where I felt like that after I was done with it, I'm like, I'm gonna have to read something about this because the fact that both of you said, "Oh, Boris loves it," but that doesn't fucking surprise me. So I read up about it, and they talked about the reason why, because if you notice throughout the movie, whenever somebody uses a telephone, they're completely baffled. They're completely befuddled about like, hello? Mm-hmm.
Operator?
Are you there? Can you hear me?
Uh-huh.
Yes, it's me. Yes, it's me. Hello, are you there? Hi, John. No, we're fine. Hello? Everyone's just completely mystified by this thing.
They play up the bit of like bad international connections a lot in this I
don't have to tell you. We've applied
that makes a lot more sense to me.
To your child's head.
If it's a bit about like international communication fucking sucks in the 70s, I'm here for that. I really am. But as I was reading about the movie, it's about the communication. See, Donald Sutherland is an ESP guy, so he's not getting proper communication or reception. So that's also translated with the phones. And I'm like, maybe.
Maybe it's two things, Russell.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, I think it's just that was a classic bit they would do in the 70s. Like that was also something they'd really have to deal with. Like you'd have friends going on like I think a lot of people during that time period probably had friends going to hostels in some weird foreign country. And they have old phone line connections, so sound problems were common.
I'm definitely not I guess was it just a thing that cause I've seen this old movies, but you could just yell at the operator and the operator was just like there?
Oh, well, that's
around?
back. Well, that was back when there was a party line. Like, this is a piece of history. Like, it used to be when you'd pick up, they wouldn't have phones in every house, so they'd have an operator sitting there standing by, waiting for some random Yahoo farmer to pick up his horn and start screaming into it. And then she'd go, "Oh, Johnny," and then she'd be like, "Oh, who do you want to talk to? Oxbow 619. Okay." And then they would start plugging things in, and then suddenly these, the squirrels would move a little bit, and people in far distant places would both scream into tiny little horns at each other. It'd be great.
I just had to laugh every time somebody used the phone in this fucking movie. I just laughed my ass off because everybody's just completely like confused. It's like, it's that thing. It's an MST3K reference, but anyway. But yeah, I can give my final thoughts about this movie. Cause I didn't love it, but I didn't hate it. That's for a movie like this, it's about as good as you could expect because I get annoyed, or at least sort of on my haunches, when the whole point of your movie is to show when the style is the one dictating the narrative. I'm always kind of bristly towards that. But that being said, it's performed well by Julie Christie and Donald Sutherland. It really is a movie that makes the general horror about human emotion, which I think is fantastic. I definitely understand the style and why it's revolutionary. I understand why this thing's considered a classic. I do. I just didn't particularly enjoy watching it. That's about where I'm at with it. Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely, there are, like I said, like I read a little bit about, this movie afterwards and its influence, and it is widely like regarded as an influence on a lot of movies, from Christopher Nolan to Ryan Murphy, the whole spectrum. I think the one that stuck out to me the most, and upon reflection, something that was very obvious because I think tonally there's a lot of similarities, even though there are different genres of films. Michael McDonough says In Bruges was very heavily influenced by this film. I think they might name it. I think they mention it by name in that movie. And it feels very similar. It's a little European town, and these people are kind of lost. And it's got this fairy tale feel.
Crazy architecture.
Feel. And
there's also Dread.
People.
Yeah.
Yes. Little people feature prominently in both, who are mistaken for others.
That was an odd thing in these that we managed to get murder dwarves. It's a thing. Yeah.
So ball's in your court later on, but yeah.
All right.
Said, I mentioned last week that I wasn't sure if I had seen this movie. I felt like I hadn't, or that I had started it and never finished it. And I realize now, his name is Martin McDonough, not Michael McDonough. I should clarify that before people try to but I realize now, what happened was about probably before we did the old podcast, I started watching this movie one night when I was giving myself my home curated horror sort of education. And
a master's course.
Exactly. And I didn't finish it. And I realize now it's because I was bored by it. And I never came back to it. I just never came back to it. And now I've come back and finished it, and I can appreciate it more than I could have when I was a 16-year-old. But it's still a little
still pretty fucking boring.
It's kind of still boring. And I am not a proponent of people being like, usually when people say a movie is boring, I'm not a fan of it. Like I saw a lot of people saying that about, like, recently I saw somebody online saying that about Midsommar. I'm like, no, that movie's not boring at all.
No.
This though, like, it is a little boring.
Yeah.
I understand there's things that I really appreciate about it. I think it's revolutionary. It really feels like a companion piece to The Wicker Man, which is also a British film that came out the exact same year. And I think in some ways has similar peaks and valleys to this film. From what I remember of it. Yeah. I'm glad I saw it. I don't know that I'll ever watch this again.
A lot of movies in the 70s are like that, Zach. Don't sweat it. It's I've seen Apocalypse Now once. I got it. That's
I actually like
I
Apocalypse
got
Now
it.
a lot. I would watch I would watch
I love
that,
that
again in a
movie.
heartbeat.
Yeah, it's been a minute. It's been about 20 years since I've seen it. I think it's about right time I should rewatch it.
Yeah.
But anyway.
The deal with it is this. Like, for me, I feel much the same way you did. Like, I like parts of this. I think it's intellectually very valuable. For a lot of editors, it's valuable. But it is pretty slow. And a movie can do a lot of things, but it can't bore me. Like, that's the thing. Like, I can be offended by it. Like, I don't think I've ever liked the Lars von Trier movie, but I would never say that, well, outside of Melancholia, I wouldn't call one boring.
Well,
I would
Jesus.
just say they're
now
offensive.
I'll never see that movie, Borov. Congratulations.
Oh,
you did it.
I think Melancholia is boring?
No, that I'll never see. I mean, of Lars von Trier, I'm very picky and choosy about it. I've never seen it, but now you've confirmed I probably won't watch that.
Yeah, no.
Unless you want to make me.
No, I don't. Because then I would have to force myself, and I don't want to do that. But yeah, my whole take on it was that I like the film for what it was. I like the time period it came out in. I do like Nicolas Roeg. I think he does a lot of interesting editing. I don't think this one was particularly exciting. I think that he might have done like Demon Seed later on in his career. I think that might be correct. And I know that he also did The Man Who Fell to Earth, which itself was a little bit slow, but was still interesting.
Yeah, good music.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Was David Bowie the soundtrack on that? I can't remember.
But I think he sang a couple songs. I mean, it's called The Man Who Fell to Earth, for God's sakes.
That's right.
He did do a lot of music with bands too. Rogue did. I mean, he loves musicians.
So yeah, that's kind of it for me on that one. Do you want me to throw the? Is this when we announce the next movie?
Yeah, so
I think now is his time as editor.
2 Murder Dwarf movies, 2 movies that are very of the 70s.
Mm-hmm.
We haven't touched the 60s as much, so we'll see. That could be.
Well,
but I think we also have avoided a lot of the major Stone Cold classics of the period. I don't think Chris is going to pick one, though. I think he's going to pick something a little weirder.
No,
I guarantee you 100%. I will make this bet now. I will bet my whole life savings that it's not.
Not one of the Stone Cold classics.
The thing is this. It's hilarious for me because of all this joking, like back and forth in texts for about a week or so. We've been going back and forth with them saying, "Oh, I bet it's this one. Oh, I bet it's that one." A lot of good picks from this period. They haven't managed to guess the entire time until just before right now when you said The Wicker Man. So it's The Wicker Man.
Oh, snap! Oh, snap!
So yeah, 1973's Robin Hardy classic, The Wicker Man. The only film he made, which is just sort of a surprise. Well, no, he made 3 films, but this is the only one that anyone cares about.
Yeah, I'm excited to see some
I'm
classic
pumped.
Christopher Lee. Yeah, absolutely.
I'm super psyched. That's amazing. This is the great part about the shows because, like, considering that Don't Look Now and Wicker Man are more or less kind of cousins, kind of like what we were talking about with Blind Spotting and Sorry to Bother You. Mm-hmm. You know, to sort of so now we're actually gonna settle the debate, really, aren't we? I mean, we're actually gonna clear this up.
Yeah.
So this is good. This is good.
I'm excited. I'm glad for this. I'm glad that we got for this horror movie segment this time period answer because prior to this, of the 6 movies we had watched, I think 4 had come out 5 years or more recently.
Hey, we did Rear Window.
Window and Police Academy.
Yeah, that's right. That's another beauty of the show. You don't just trap your co-hosts, you trap yourself.
Yeah, we haven't been too chronologically diverse yet in any of these themes. We'll have to see how extreme we can get someday.
All right. Well, I'm looking forward to it. Wicker Man, I haven't seen it. Probably my self-described horror education. Probably the last time I watched that movie.
Oh,
I think I was in...
I'm sure it's got to be better than the Nicolas Cage one written by that misogynist.
Oh, yeah. No, we're not... specifically we're not doing the remake. Carlson, you've seen it before, right? Yeah.
I have. Dan the Man. Yeah. You better believe it.
All right.
Can't go wrong with Christopher Lee.
Yeah,
he's a boy.
Yes, you can. Yes, you can. You very much can go wrong with Christopher Lee.
You can't be mad at Christopher Lee.
No, you can't. Well, Fu Manchu.
There was also that time that he played the founder of Pakistan, but he was also well loved in that part by people in Pakistan. So it's an interesting challenge. We can get into it next week. Though.
What, Fu Manchu?
Oh yeah, no, that one's full on. I mean, they're both kind of race bending. It's an interesting argument. Okay, so
we have our challenge.
We do. We are ready to do the Wicker Man,
and this will conclude our Halloween trilogy. We'll see who gets the bonus of an extra film at the end of this. All. Yeah, I'm excited to wrap it up next week, guys.
Alrighty. Well, I guess on that note, we'll close in reverse chronological alphabetical order.
What?
I'm the oldest, but my name goes first.
You're the oldest with your name first and last name goes first. Russell's in the middle. His name first and last goes second. I'm the youngest. My name first and last.
Oh man,
we have literally the easiest namesakes as far as all of it and age sakes to do this right, and we have yet to do it.
It's easy.
Oh my god, I've been Chris Borff. It's
no matter
been great.
what order.
I'll see y'all. Goodbye. Oh god, good night.
I've been Russell Carlson. Thanks for listening.
I have been Zach Powers. Z, end of the alphabet. P, it's behind B and C.
Find him.
He just
warn
left.
him. You must find him. You must warn him.
When did he leave?
She told you to leave.
I don't know.
She told
you must know where he went. Why did he leave? Where did he say he was going?
She told you.
I don't know.
Leave Venice.